This is the 11th session of anger therapy. My name is Dr. Shane P. Linder, and in this session, we are going to have a discussion. We're going to look at this topic of inferiority. Do you know that we are all equal? Equality is something that is very important in the American society. In the United States, we strive to be equal. The Constitution of the United States guarantees equal rights to all members of society. In practice, it doesn't always work out that way. There are many things that cause inequality. Oftentimes we think of racial issues, that different people from different racial groups are treated differently. And certainly there's a lot of truth to that. But it's not just about race. There's a lot of things that cause inequality. Among the top of the list, and perhaps even greater than race, is economic class. It seems the poor do not get the same opportunities as the wealthy. And I think it's been that way throughout history if we want to go all the way back to ancient Egypt or China. There's just always things that prevent the ideal of perfect equality that we all strive for. But we are all equal in one important measure, and that is we are all equal in the eyes of God. God sees us all in the same light when it comes to our sinfulness and our opportunity for salvation. We all are sinful. In Romans chapter 3, verse 23, it tells us that all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. There is no inequality when it comes to sinfulness. And also, when it comes to our salvation, there is no inequality. For Jesus said that God so loved the world that he sent his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him shall not perish but have everlasting life. That whosoever means anybody, rich and poor, black, white, yellow, brown, purple, green, whatever people in society want to call us. I mean, when I look at skin color, you know what I see? I just see different shades. Some people are very white and some people are very brown. And then there's a lot of different shades in between that. But society has labeled different colors of skin. Like some people they say have red skin and some people they say have yellow skin. But, well, if I was king of labeling skin color, I would probably label things differently. But, we have to accept the fact that we don't get to do things and make rules for society that maybe we would like to be able to do. But biblically, reading the Bible, we know that all are equal in God's sight. Now, there's times that each one of us will struggle with inferiority, right? Because we don't measure up, just like Romans 3:23 tells us. We don't measure up. And so the reality is, when we are compared to that perfect state that Adam was created in, we all are inferior. I mean, none of us measures up to the perfect statute, the perfect character that Adam had when God first created him. However, in respect to other people that are living today, we're not inferior at all, not in God's eyes, and that's what counts. We're all equal. We're all sinners, and we all have the opportunity for salvation. This feeling of inferiority can cause low self-esteem. And that feeling of low self-esteem, feeling inferior, that can cause us to get angry. And oftentimes, people that suffer trauma during their childhood or neglect struggle with this more than others. Children that are affirmed by their parents, and their parents provide for all their emotional needs, and they feel loved and cared for and safe as children. they do not struggle with low self-esteem and inferiority as much. But let's not fool ourselves and think that some people don't have inferiority problems. Everybody has them. It's just how much, how frequently, how often do they feel it. But everybody feels inferior at some time because in the back of our mind, in our subconscious, we know that something is wrong with us. And that something is our sinful nature. So all of us feel some inferiority at some point in time. We also struggle with insecurity. Is the world a safe place? Or is the world a dangerous place? And our childhood also has a lot to do with that. Neglect harms children a lot. And so a lot of parents do not think of themselves as being abusive. And a lot of adults that were neglected when they were children, they look back at their childhood and they don't feel like they were abused. They say, well, my parents never abused me. There was never any fighting in the house. I was not sexually abused. I was not physically abused. But there was neglect. Okay, the parents did not invest emotionally, did not give the children the time, did not spend the time with the children that the children needed. And so there was some neglect there. And that can transfer over into our adult years and show up as this feeling of inadequacy, inferiority, that we don't feel like we are good enough. We feel that other people are more worthy than we are. And the devil uses that to get at us. And so that can oftentimes cause anger, because in anger, we want to be heard. And if we feel that we are inferior, then we need to be loud. We need to let people hear us. But we can rest assured that in God's eyes, we are equal. We are not inferior. One thing that really makes people that deal with an inferiority complex angry is when they are made to look foolish. And sometimes they make themselves look foolish, and they are really hard on themselves, and they can get very angry, not necessarily at anybody else, but at themselves. Why did I do that? Why am I so stupid? And that type of attitude that they have. But none of us know everything. And so people that struggle with an inferiority complex tend to be hard on themselves. Now, humiliation, when somebody else purposely does something to humiliate you, that can really make somebody angry. And that is completely wrong of the other person. As we've discussed earlier, when we have these interpersonal relationships, the purpose of that interpersonal relationship is to show dignity. The people around you should show you dignity, just as you should be showing them dignity. So if somebody purposely humiliates you, that is wrong of them. But oftentimes they're doing that because they are damaged themselves. I worked with an individual once, as you may know, I've mentioned it before, I'm bivocational. I am not only a counselor and a chaplain, but I am also a construction manager. And I was working a project once, and I had a project superintendent that was working below me. I was his boss. And he had the habit of trying to humiliate people. And he would try to humiliate me, but he would also humiliate workers, hourly workers, like carpenters and electricians and concrete masons. If somebody wasn't doing something right, like perhaps they didn't wear their hard hat or weren't using the correct tool or something, he would make an issue out of it by trying to humiliate them. And that is a terrible, terrible communication tool. You want somebody that's going to hate you and plan your demise, humiliate them. And it is very difficult for somebody to get along with somebody else when there is humiliation in the mix. But that superintendent that I worked with, I suspect that as a child, his father beat him. he was probably physically beat, and his father humiliated him. And then as he grew up as an adult, he became a toxic individual as he was doing it to other people. That, unfortunately, is what happens. Hurt people hurt people. So when somebody does lash out at us, we can remember the Beatitudes that Jesus gave in the Sermon on the Mount. And we love our enemies. We bless those that persecute us. Return kind words where there are unkind words that are said. But it certainly can be a trigger to make somebody angry. Because especially if we're dealing with an inferiority complex already, and then somebody comes along and tries to humiliate us, that can be very, very angering. But when that happens, if we can engage in our frontal lobe, the portion of our brain that deals with reason and logic, we can love that enemy. Unfortunately, what happens sometimes is we flip into that fight or flight mode, and we get very emotional, and our emotional centers of the brain hijack us, and we react in such a way that is not appropriate. And we're going to get into some solutions, some treatments for anger at the end of this series. But that is certainly something that happens, and it is certainly understandable. Being humiliated, being made to look foolish, is one of the triggers that is very difficult when we are trying to manage our anger. Well, what happens when we start feeling inferior? That's not a very good feeling. Now, there are few people that are just going to wallow in self-pity and become depressed, and they might even commit suicide. And that's serious. But that's a minority. Most people, when they start feeling inferior, they don't get depressed and they don't commit suicide. Most of them flip into what we call false superiority. That is, I'll show you. And this is where our anger can take over and take control. So they get this feeling, or we get this feeling of inferiority, and then we transition into this false superiority. One of the tactics that we use is insulting others. Okay, so if we feel that we are inferior, then we turn it around and try to insult the other person, trying to make them feel inferior, that we are actually superior to them. That is not a healthy tactic. And what happens, like our workbook, if you go through the workbook, it compares it to a seesaw, or what I call a teeter-totter. Well, children playing on the playground, they get on a teeter-totter, and one goes up and the other goes down. One goes up and the other goes down. And when we get into this false superiority issue, we put somebody else down so that we go up, but it's only a matter of time that they are going to go up and we are going to go down. And then there's this little struggle that goes back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And this happens in some marriages and in some families between siblings, brothers and sisters, and it is not healthy. And this is the response to feeling inferior. Now, remember, the feeling of inferiority is experienced by everyone at some point in time. This is caused by our sinful nature because we are inferior to the perfection that Adam had when he was created. So this is a very natural feeling that we're going to feel it sometimes. But our reaction to that oftentimes is to flip into false superiority. So then something that is natural for us to feel, we are now hurting other people. We are causing problems. We are stirring up the pot to overcome this feeling of inferiority that everybody feels at some time or another. Granted, children that grew up in traumatic homes or homes where there was abuse or neglect, they feel inferior more often than others, but Everybody feels it at some point. And when we feel that we are inferior, we want to be careful not to jump into false superiority. Now, that is very difficult when we are being attacked. And sometimes, as I mentioned, sometimes people deliberately try to humiliate us. It's a terrible, terrible thing that they're doing. And our reaction is going to be try to push back on that. And going into false superiority is a tactic that is often used. But it's not healthy, and it's just going to get us into that seesaw issue. You know, the teeter-totter. I'm up, you're down, now you're up, and I'm down. Gossip is another way that we try to get over this false false belief, or this belief that we are inferior, which is not true, because God looks at us all equally. But Satan wants to reinforce in our minds that we are inferior. But we want to fight against that. Remind ourselves what Jesus Christ did for us. So one of the reasons why the Christmas time and Easter time are such important holidays, because those are really times for us to celebrate what Jesus did for us. And he made us all equal. When we sinned, we took on a fallen nature. And that was Adam, making all of us equal. For sin entered the world through one man, right? The Bible tells us. But Jesus Christ, through his life and death on the cross, overcame sin for us and restores our relationship with God. And so we are made equal through Jesus Christ. We all have that opportunity for salvation. And gossip, and that sometimes gossip is even found in Christian churches. Can you imagine that? A place that people go for healing, a place that they go for restoration with their Creator and their Redeemer. And yet there are members, even in Christian churches, that are gossiping about each other because they're trying to overcome, get past this feeling of inferiority. But that gossip is a trigger for many people to get angry. So the feelings of inferiority that we feel make us angry, and the false superiority that often occurs as a result also feeds our anger. You see how it is the teeter-totter, and you see how demons just delight to see humans caught up in this. Sometimes this is manifested by barking orders, we say, placing demands on other people, showing them that we're the boss and we're in charge. This even happens in families, with parents yelling at their children. Now, why would parents need to embrace false superiority? The parents are the authorities. But often there are dysfunctional types of parenting. And parenting can actually damage the children when it is not done according to the Christian model. Not going to get into parenting in this video series. I will have another video series available on my website for parenting that you can look for. But parents tend to bark orders when they are practicing or experiencing a false sense of superiority. Barking orders, bosses yelling at employees, employees yelling at each other, siblings yelling at each other, like dogs that are barking. It's false superiority. Giving unsolicited advice. That is also a way that we practice false superiority. And oftentimes this advice comes in the form of criticism. You invite somebody into your house and they start criticizing the way you raise your children or the way you have your house decorated. You should do this, you should do that. This happens in the workplace. It happens in churches. It happens in social circles. Do you know that one of the first things they teach in graduate school when somebody goes to school to become a counselor is not to give advice? And you would think that if anybody was in a position to give advice, it would be a counselor, because people are coming to the counselor for what? Well, what we in the counseling industry or world, we say they're coming to the counseling for guidance. Guidance is the word that we use, not advice. The only time a good counselor, is going to give out advice is if it's an emergency situation. For example, if the client is suicidal and looking to commit suicide, the counselor will give them advice. Or if they are in an abusive situation, like a physical abusive situation where for example, a husband is being abused by an alcoholic wife. He comes home and she throws a lampshade at him, or a lamp at him. There's trouble in that home. The alcoholic wife, in this hypothetical example, maybe she's physically abusing the children, and then the counselor would tell the husband in that situation, you need to take the children and leave the home. You need to do this. And so in that case, a counselor would give advice, or you reverse it, and it's an abusive husband with a wife. Either way, that if there's abuse like that, or there's a suicidal issue, the counselor will give advice. But in the overwhelming cases, one of the first things you learn in graduate school is that a counselor is not to give advice. We provide guidance by providing information so that the client can make decisions for themselves. And we may ask questions. Oftentimes we ask lots of questions, and that is so that we know which information would be helpful to provide to the client. But the client needs to make their own decisions. And what happens outside of the counseling world, just in families and churches, is people are giving unsolicited advice, and most of the time that is because of false superiority. We all feel inferior at sometimes, and then we counter that by this false sense of superiority. And that is not the way to deal with our inferiority issues, because it just perpetrates the issue of inferiority. It plays into the devil's hands. That's what the devil wants. He does not want us to resolve things in a healthy way. He wants to cause problems. He wants to stir the pot. A healthy relationship with another person is when we show them respect, when we give them dignity, and they show us respect, and they show us dignity in return. When that fails to happen is when we have an unhealthy relationship. The key to learning to handle anger appropriately is understanding that everybody deserves respect. Everybody deserves dignity, because we're all in this mess together. Romans 3:23 tells us, all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Instead of being a teeter-totter or a seesaw, where one person is up and the other person is down, the healthy metaphor is a merry-go-round, where we are all on the same level. But we are spinning around in this crazy circle of a fallen, sinful world. We're all in it together. We're all on the merry-go-round together. And although we are all spinning and not being able to control the direction that we are going in, we need to show each other respect. We need to be dignified with each other. And when we fail to do that is when our relationships are no longer healthy. One of the ways we do that is by understanding where the other person comes from. Consider the life circumstances of others. The story I told earlier about the superintendent that I worked with that would always humiliate other people. He did that to me. And I would let it roll off me like water off a duck's back. I don't know what his history was, but I just assumed that it was pretty ugly. In fact, in my mind, while he was trying to humiliate me, I actually thought, I wonder if your father beat you. I wonder what happened to you. Why do you act this way? Of course, I never said that to him. But there was times where he actually tried to humiliate our boss because our boss had told him he was going to do something and the boss didn't follow through. And the superintendent then, confronting the boss, tried to humiliate the boss. It's like he was out of control. He knew no bounds. I mean, you don't act that way towards somebody. You don't humiliate people. But he did. And so I figured something must have been wrong in his past. What we call that is giving somebody the benefit of the doubt. And we can practice it on the highway or expressway when we are in bad traffic and somebody speeds past us, they cut us off, whatever they're doing. We don't know their circumstance. Maybe they have a pregnant woman with them. Maybe they just got a call and they have a family member dying in the hospital that they are anxious to get there to see. We don't know, so we give them the benefit of the doubt. And that is the spirit of love that the Apostle Paul talks about in 1 Corinthians chapter 13. We give others the benefit of the doubt when we don't know their circumstances. That is considering the life circumstances of other people. And it goes a long way to prevent us from getting angry. First off, we resist going into the false sense of superiority. We consider the fact that we are all equal in front of God. And then we consider their life circumstances. You know, God shows no partiality. There's no partiality with God. The Apostle Paul knew that. And he has written a lot about all of us being equal in the eyes of God. The Apostle Peter, however, struggled with this. But eventually he realized that Jews were no longer, or no, not ever, better than Gentiles. He had considered himself to be superior to other religions or other races because he was a Jew. But recorded in Acts chapter 10, verse 34, he says that God shows no partiality. Peter finally got it. He figured out what the Apostle Paul was preaching. Partiality is often shown not only in respect of race, but in the respect of class, in the respect of education or nationality. Believe it or not, there's actually Americans that think they are better than people from other countries just because of the land that they were born on. At Christmas time, we celebrate the birth of Jesus Christ. And at Easter, we celebrate his death. There was Old Testament prophecies that prophesied the exact year that Jesus was going to be anointed. And so those living at the time that he was born did not know the exact year he was going to be born, but those that were students of prophecy and correctly understood them, like the three wise men or the three kings that came to visit him, they knew that there was a window of time when he was going to be born. They didn't know if he'd be anointed when he was 12 or 15 or 25, or as it was when he was 30. But they had this window. And those wise men saw the star and they put the prophecies together. They figured out when he was going to be born. Now, many of the Jews at the time mistakenly read prophecies about Jesus' second coming, and that's why they missed it. They were expecting Jesus to come as a king, like he will come in his second coming. We are living during the time, that window of time, when Jesus is going to come back the second time. Just as the wise men didn't know the exact year when Jesus was going to come the first time, they had a general idea of the time frame, within, 0 to 50 years, within like a 50-year window, they figured when he was going to come. We do not know the exact time that Jesus is going to return, but we have a general time frame, which is the time that we are living. When we talk about equality, the only equality we really have to worry about is where we will stand on the day that Jesus returns. There are going to be those that are forgiven and those that are not forgiven. Where will I stand? Where will you stand? The forgiven are going to stand together. And it doesn't matter if the forgiven person is black, or if he was white, or if he was an American Indian, or if he was Chinese. That won't matter. He's either forgiven or he's not forgiven. It won't matter if he worked as a doctor, or if he worked as a janitor, or if he had been the president of the United States. He is either forgiven or he is unforgiven. That is all we need to worry about. And so when we interact with somebody else, we cannot think that we are any better than they are. What is the difference between somebody that is forgiven and unforgiven? It's not that the forgiven person went to the university and studied and graduated and has a very beautiful diploma hanging on his wall. It's not that the forgiven person has performed certain penance and been forgiven for his good works. The forgiven person has accepted the grace of Jesus Christ. There is nothing about that forgiven person that makes him superior over somebody that is unforgiven. The only difference is that the forgiven person has accepted Christ's grace. The unforgiven person has not. We need to bear that in mind so that we view everyone equally. We're all spinning around on this merry-go-round. It's a crazy world. It's a sinful, fallen planet. We are all equal. We are all equally in need of the grace of God. In our society, we often assign value to people based on what they have accomplished or what they plan to accomplish. If you ever met somebody for the first time, oftentimes one of the first questions they ask you is, what do you do for a living? If you tell them I'm a student, oh, what are you studying? Imagine they ask, what are you studying? And one person answers, I am studying art. And another person answers, I am studying to be a doctor. And another person says, I'm in the seminary. I'm studying to be a minister. The typical person would evaluate all three of those students and place different amounts of value on them. Depending upon the person, some may value the doctor as the most valuable. Others may consider the minister as the most valuable. And still others would consider the artist as most valuable. Value such as that really is in the mind of the person thinking about it. These are comparisons, and it's faulty to try to assign more value to one profession than to another, because when we study society, everybody's needed. It goes back to the Apostle Paul in the book of Corinthians talking about the church and the human body and how one part isn't more important than the other part. We need the eye, we need the hand, we need the foot, we need all the components. The doctor's no more valuable than the artist, or than the factory worker, or the school teacher, the clerk at the supermarket. We all have a role to play, and it is essential for the functioning of society that everybody plays their role. But we get into comparisons. Not only are we going to compare different people working in different professions, but we will compare different doctors of who the better doctor is and who the better artist is, and we get into all of these different comparisons. And certainly there probably are Clearly, there are better doctors than other doctors. Clearly, there's better artists than other artists. But that doesn't make one more valuable than the other. Remember, value is determined by God. In the spiritual mind, the way we should view reality, a Christian worldview, is to view it as God views it. And God values everybody the same. In order to save a person, Jesus Christ had to shed his blood. And it's not like he had to shed more blood for the good doctor than for the not so good doctor. Every lost soul requires the blood of Christ to be saved. That is the value of each person. Our value is measured by a price. If you go to an auction and the auctioneer is auctioning off an item, how much is it worth? It is worth what the highest bidder bids for it. That is the value of the item. In the open market, that is how capitalist societies determine value of a market, of a product. The value of a soul is the blood of Christ. And it doesn't matter if they're a janitor or a waitress, or if they are a farmer, or if they're a doctor. It is the blood of Christ. Comparisons between one profession and another, between somebody highly skilled in their profession and a lesser skilled person in that same profession, have no impact on value. And that's what we need to grasp. Our value is determined by our price. And God paid the same price for you as he paid for me. No matter what you do in this life, no matter who you are, no matter what family you belong to, no matter what nation you were born in, no matter what the color of your skin is, you are of no greater value than I am. Because God paid the same price for you as he paid for me. And we can compare. In my country, we have a certain way of doing things. We have certain luxuries. In your country, you have other ways of doing things and other luxuries. Is one better than the other? One certainly, your individual value certainly is not changed by anything that's in your society. Because Jesus Christ gave his blood to purchase you. And that is your price. And in dealing with anger that stems from inferiority, we need to grasp that. Now, one thing that we get into that can perpetuate this inferiority complex is performance. I am a fan of The Chosen. It's a TV series about the life of Christ. It's got a bunch of made-up backstories that are not biblical. But the director has fun creating these possibilities of possibly this was the story behind this character, which, of course, it's highly unlikely that that's the way it went. But in one of the episodes, Nicodemus is being pressured by his wife to prepare for some remarks that he is going to give at a Sabbath sundown dinner. They're welcoming the Sabbath on Friday night. And she is telling him how if he prepares for it, he will get a better performance. And he gets frustrated. And he's like, why do I always have to perform? That's a legitimate frustration. A lot of people place value upon us. They do it wrongly. But a lot of people place value upon us by our performance. And when we perform in a way that they believe is good, they praise us. And if we perform in a way that's not so good, they withhold their praise. And when we praise other people for their performance, we can play into this inferiority complex. There is a threat of evaluation. And that is when I evaluate your performance and tell you that you did good, and thus insinuate that you have value because of your good performance, the backside of that is that there is a threat that if you do not perform well, I will diminish your value. You see how that is? It's the unsaid. So I tell you what a wonderful job that you did. And the unheard threat is if you don't do such a wonderful job, I will devalue you. One way that we can avoid this is to focus on a person's feelings instead of their performance. So when my son gets very good grades in school, I ask him, how does that feel? Doesn't that feel good? Wow, I am glad that you're feeling so good about it. I'm glad that you have this satisfaction. And it's very easy. I fall into it myself sometimes. It's very easy to focus on performance. But the more we can focus on feelings and the less we can focus on performance, the better we will display to other people the idea of equality, because everybody's feelings are valid, and regardless what their performance is. God can judge. And God will judge. We know that at the end of time, when Jesus comes in those clouds of glory, that he will separate the sheep from the goats, the forgiven from the unforgiven. And those that have accepted the grace of Jesus Christ will be forgiven. And they will be judged based upon Jesus' performance. You see, when Jesus looks at us, when God the Father looks at us and looks at our lives and judges whether or not our lives are good enough or not, those of us that have accepted the grace of Jesus Christ, we will be judged by the works of Jesus Christ. We're forgiven. Those that have not accepted the grace of Jesus Christ will be judged by their own works. They're not going to come up that good. They are going to come up lacking and not be forgiven because they haven't accepted the grace of Jesus Christ. And those that are saved, the reason that we are more valuable than those that are not saved is why? What did I say? The value of an object is determined by what? The price paid for it. Well, those that are lost, Jesus shed his blood for them too. But because they didn't accept his grace, they were never bought. They were never paid for. And they're lost. So their value is diminished by their own decision of not accepting the grace of Jesus Christ. But he paid the price for them. It was there. The offer was there for them to accept it. And Jesus invites them today, come to me. He's paid the price. So in assigning value to other people, we need to remember that God is the judge, and God is going to know who accepts his grace and who doesn't accept his grace. And he's going to judge accordingly, not based upon our works and our accomplishments and our performance in this life, but based upon his grace. And in this series, I don't want to dig too deep into the salvation issue. I don't focus on that a lot, but as a pastoral counselor, that is an issue that I get into with clients. But in this video series, I don't want to take the time to get sidetracked into that. But we are saved by the faith of Jesus Christ. He has done it all for us. We simply need to accept that. Now, what does it look like when we accept grace? That is a topic for another sermon, for another session, and a different educational session. But be assured that is a relevant part of anger management, is understanding that we are bought and paid for by the grace of Jesus Christ. It is his blood that determines our value, and everybody else has the same value as we do. We are not inferior, nor are we superior. I want to end this session with a prayer, as I always do. Heavenly Father, we know that working with anger takes effort on our part. We can't just snap our fingers and be miraculously changed. We have to put your yoke upon us. Just as two animals yoked together, we partner with you. And working together with you, we can become better people and have more control over our anger. And that is what we pray, Lord, is work with us. Take our efforts and multiply our efforts to change, to create that miracle in us. We want to see everyone as the same. And when we feel inferior, we want to remember the blood you shed for us on the cross. And that in your eyes we are not inferior, but we are precious. For you sent your Son to die for us. And we do not need to feel like we are less than anyone else. We are valued by you, just like you value everybody else. We are on equal ground, and we thank you for that. Pray this in Jesus' precious name. Amen. These past few videos have been a little bit shorter, and so it is always good to wait a week before you see the next video. Take some time, maybe watch this video again, go through the workbook, do those assignments that are in the workbook, and pray daily, read your Bible daily, and journal. If you're not journaling yet, journal. That is also a critical part of anger therapy.